Hi, I'm Ashmita Das. I run a platform called Kolabtree, where we connect scientists and industry experts with business organizations for on-demand services. And I have here with me today, Dr. Jacob Glanville. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So Jake, quite famously, you were featured in the remarkably prescient Netflix documentary, Pandemic: How to Prevent an Outbreak. You served on multiple advisory committees or boards. You've received grants and awards from the Gates Foundation. You are a National Institute of Health Principal Investigator. You were a guest lecturer at Stanford and USF. You're also a principal scientist at Pfizer. Over your career, you've developed seminal methods and technologies published in top journals like PNAS and Nature. And since 2012, you co-founded the company called Distributed Bio, and you are now running its spin-off Centivax. So you're a serial entrepreneur, an inventor, a computational immuno-engineer, among other things. How would you describe yourself in your work?
I'm an immune hacker. So the way I would describe my work is that I have been very fortunate that the things that I like to do have coincided really nicely with the emerging golden age in biotechnology. So what I do is I use math and computers and then good old-fashioned roll up your sleeves, wet lab work to interrogate the immune system and to try to figure out how to get the best responses out of the immune system to treat various diseases, as well as harness therapeutic molecules directly out of the immune system, monoclonal antibodies that can serve as drugs. And kind of the beautiful thing about where I am and what I do and what I love about it is that, first off, the immune system is affecting pretty much every disease. The obvious things like infections, things that may be not obvious to everyone like cancer and neurodegeneration and heart disease, and pretty much you're actually hard pressed to find somewhere in medicine where the immune system isn't involved, because your immune system is designed to detect changes in tissues, and that's what disease is. And so inflammation and tissue attack, these are all areas where immune system acts as a powerful keystone in understanding and in treating many disorders. And then the flip side of it is it's also a great source of medicines like antibodies and understanding how to produce better broad spectrum vaccines. All of these cool applications have become much easier to attack with vigor with the emerging golden age of biotechnology, where we have high throughput genomic sequencing instruments, high throughput DNA synthesis instruments, and a plethora of other really cool single cell sequencing technologies and microfluidics and other shiny toys. And so part of my job is to try to understand that system using math and computers and try to come up with good engineering tactics for creating better medicines that can treat problems that have plagued us since the beginning of time, but finally in our generation we can attack them and win some of these forever wars.
Okay, I think the whole world, whether they like it or not, has become a lot more acquainted with the immune system and immuno responses. So can you talk a little bit about your latest venture called Centivax, where I think from the description on the website, you're aiming to develop broad spectrum medicines to treat 21st century diseases, and that includes a flu vaccine to protect against all strains of influenza, antivenoms to treat all snake bites, therapeutics against rapidly mutating cancers. So what's the vision with this new company?
Sure. So yeah, this has kind of been my long range plan and dream, and I'm finally being able to manifest it. It was the idea of being able to harness some of these new technologies, which I spent time optimizing and engineering, first at Pfizer, then at my first venture, Distributed Bio, and then after I sold it, now I'm finally ready with a decade of my research gone into being able to build antibodies or even provoke antibodies out of a living organism that bind these Achilles heels on viruses and pathogens, these very special sites that you get the right antibody against that special site, they turn out to be much more effective. So in the case of the coronavirus, we're getting ready to start our clinical studies on an antibody that binds a very conserved part of the coronavirus, that the new escape variants, these mutants from like the UK Indian strain, we're able to hit all of them. We're able to engineer the antibody to do that. We do something similar with our broad spectrum vaccine technology, where we teach the immune system to make those kinds of antibodies. For the snake bite, we have this great, amazing guy named Tim Freedy, and his body had generated these antibodies that are able to bind those sorts of conserved sites across snake venom from all snakes. These are the kinds of applications. They're also ones that may surprise you that are important in autoimmunity and oncology, where we're also targeting these very mutating and diverse populations of, say, cancers or parts of the immune for diversity. And we hack those systems pretty well. That's the strength of our technology. So we're a therapeutics and a vaccine company. We work on humans as well as veterinary medicine. And our goal is to create substantial advances using the new technologies that are available to us to attack systems where other scientists before us have already figured out kind of what the problem is. It's just the challenge is the engineering to attack that problem. And the core issue in therapeutic science, there's two challenges. One is, what's the target? And two, can you drug it? And I've always felt that what's the target is a way harder problem. If you know that, can you drug it is just an engineering solution, and that's our strength. So we basically attack with vigor problems that people have gotten pretty close, but not all the way, and we think we can solve them well.
Okay, and when you say immunohacking, what you're trying to do is maybe take the natural responses our bodies produce and using that as the therapeutic.
We extend beyond what the human body can produce. The human body, the problem with it, viruses and pathogens, snakes, and cancers, and autoimmunity have hacked our immune system. They figured out what we're really good at, and there's this never-ending arms race of trying to have a diversity of the pathogen or the cancer against the diversity of our immune system. And these two armies have met at war since the beginning of time, and they both learned each other's weaknesses. And that's where the stalemate arises, and that's why sometimes you get sick. That's why you can't just take nature. Right? There's a lot of technologies out there. People are trying to pull single cells from patients. And the problem is patients get sick sometimes. These pathogens have ways around it. So we engineer beyond what nature can deliver. We've learned how to use these systems so we can hack beyond where nature naturally gets stuck. That's nature doesn't normally produce a broad neutralizing response against all influenza. And we don't have a working HIV vaccine currently. That's where our technology comes in. We ask ourselves, where's the defect? And then we engineer beyond it to try to push beyond what nature's provided so that we can actually win some of these forever wars against some of these pathogens that have harassed us since the beginning of time. So that's the added piece, is the golden age of biotechnology to help us push back past the stalemate and achieve victory. And I will say that sounds ambitious, but I'll remind you, back in 1980, we were able to eradicate smallpox, and we have nearly eradicated a number of other pathogens. There has been this remarkable success of vaccine science and remarkable success in multiple Nobel Prizes awarded around monoclonal antibodies, but those technologies are really still operating based on last century's biotechnology capabilities. So we're bringing in these new technologies to be able to make better engineered medicines to break through the continued limitations of nature. So we infer from nature, but we move beyond it in order to create better medicines.
Fascinating stuff. Now, with Centivax, you're currently creating an antibody therapeutic treatment for the coronavirus. And I understand it's going into clinical trials very shortly. So what's the progress on this therapeutic, and what role do you see it playing in managing this pandemic, even as the effort to vaccinate continues?
Yeah, so since the beginning of the outbreak, really it was January 29th, 2020, I initiated this program. And because my team specializes in pandemic medicine, broad spectrum medicine, we knew right away there were going to be two big problems that we needed to address here. There's actually a third that the clinical trials will tell us if we're right or not about. The first was we knew the virus was going to start mutating. And so there were some efforts to produce antibody therapies really fast last year, and they came out and they're already being revoked by the FDA because the new mutant versions of the virus, which are more infectious, they may be more deadly, but they're also more mutated, and that's causing those early antibodies to no longer bind effectively to the virus. So that the Lilly antibody has been revoked. The Regeneron antibody cocktail still works, but it's weaker against the new variant strains. We spent the time to engineer an antibody that binds, like I said, an Achilles heel, a very sensitive part of the virus that binds all these new emerging strains. It not only doesn't get affected by any of the current variants, but we can anticipate that the new variants in the future won't impact our antibody either. So that's one important thing. The second one was that I could anticipate that it was going to be a major problem to try to deliver a normal antibody therapy in the midst of a pandemic. And the reason for that is that normal antibody therapies, you have to give a big dose in an infusion bag. And that means you have to get an IV, and someone who's a specialist to give you an IV has to give it to you in an infusion center. The problem in a pandemic is that anyone who can get an IV or can give you an IV, or any location where you could receive an IV, those areas are already full of much more sick patients. And so the best time to give an antibody therapy is right when you found out you got sick, as early as possible. You want to stamp out the match before it becomes a forest fire. The problem is, if you call right now and say, hey, look, I just found out I have SARS-CoV-2, I'm infected, I want to get the antibody therapy, what do you think the doctor's going to say? They're going to say, you know what, you're not sick enough. Like, wait, hope you don't get more. So the problem is then you're getting more sick. So by the time you arrive, you're in a much worse position. And so that was a problem we wanted to address. And that's where our engineering advantage comes in. What we were able to do is engineer our antibody to be able to go ultra high concentration so we can fit it into an injectable syringe. Then you don't need to go to an infusion center. You just get a pop in the arm or in the leg, and you can get the medicine early. We can give a smaller dose. We can give it much early, which means we can make much more doses. And it means that is a powerful way to transform how scary this pathogen is, because you can get a shot early so you don't get sick in the first place. You don't risk going to the hospital, you don't risk death, and you don't risk, we're going to evaluate this, but we believe that it will avoid some of the long hauler risk of the complications that arise from a serious infection here. So that's a really big deal, being able to actually have a medicine which you can mass produce and is accessible and is able to work against the future variants. And that's the area where we hope to bring in. The big picture goal is that vaccines are great. They're definitely important. We're going to have them. But the truth is, we are not going to make enough vaccine for the world. We're about 10% of humans vaccinated right now. The new vaccines are already having to be created to adapt to the new mutant strains. And second, there's not enough people in the world willing to take the vaccines for us to achieve herd immunity, which means the coronavirus is here to stay. We can reduce the amount of the outbreaks, but they will still happen. And that means what we really need is a therapy. An effective therapy downgrades this from a medical crisis to a manageable infectious disease. Because what you want is, instead of saying, oh no, I got coronavirus, this is a disaster, you go, oh, it's annoying, I'm going to go get my shot and I'll be fine. And then the world goes back to normal. And so that's where we fit in.
Okay, all right. And I understand that actually, and you touched upon this a little bit, one of the primary aims of Centivax technology is to make it more affordable and accessible than the alternatives. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy and approach you're using to make this possible?
Yeah, sure. So there's two types of strategies here. One is technology driven, and the other one is really financially driven. So from a technological basis, there's a couple things you can do to make a medicine more affordable. You can make it more potent. You can make it be able to be delivered at a smaller dose at a more opportune time, like earlier in an infectious disease. The effect of both of those things is that they reduce the cost of goods. Also, if you can produce a medicine that you can manufacture more doses in a given vat, those things are to your advantage. You can make more. The second thing you can do, and we aggressively explore, are new manufacturing technologies. So right now, the whole world for antibodies, almost everyone uses a technology called CHO. It's like the floppy disk. Everybody uses it. Everybody knows it sucks. So people want to look to the future, to a manufacturing technology that could scale much larger, produce a lot more doses, and be able to make these medicines mass producible. Right now, there is really a problem of there's a finite number of sites around the world where you can produce CHO-based antibodies, and that limits the utility of the biologics revolution. So we invest heavily in a number of technologies because we aren't sure which one's going to win, but we're looking at the ones that are going to be able to be that next manufacturing mega juggernaut, and that could have the effect of reducing the cost and increasing the distribution. So that's the technology side of things. On the other side, though, is the economics. So I've just talked about reducing cost of goods, but it's important to remember that the cost of goods of a biologic is nowhere near the price that you're charged for it. So if you had cancer and you were to receive a typical biologic, an antibody cancer drug, you might be charged somewhere around, say, $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 for a dose, a single dose, and you might need multiple doses. The cost of goods for a dose, what do you think that is? It's $100, maybe $200. So the cost of goods is not what drives the cost of the medicine. The rest of the cost of the medicine is a calculation on how much the insurance company is willing to pay for that medicine. That's why if you have an antibody for cancer versus an antibody for macular degeneration, a blindness disease, they're both the same type of product. They cost about the same to produce, but you're going to pay more than twice as much for the cancer drug because the cancer drug is more expensive for the insurance company to deal with you if they don't have a medicine. And so it's really an absurd scenario. It's driven by the objectives of the pharmaceutical company to maximize revenue, but unfortunately, it doesn't maximize the number of people who benefit. And there are many people who can't afford it if they don't have effective insurance. And there are certainly many nations who may not be able to afford it. And in fact, there's some tension between some of these pricing and what medicines make it into Europe, because the European Commission has issues with some of these pricing decisions. And they're artificial. As I've just indicated, they are not subject to normal market forces. These are really, and they're nowhere near the cost of goods of the product. Now, the pharmaceutical companies will say, listen, we've invested so much money and time in order to make these medicines successful. We have to recoup some of those losses. And the truth is that's true. I benefit from a lot of the great work that's gone in for decades by these mega pharmaceutical companies to build a lot of the tools that I benefit from. Now, since then, I've also created my own tools, but I couldn't have gotten there without them. So the truth is that investment has been worth it. I'm okay with them making money on this first set of generation of medicine. However, that said, we are now in a position where you could form a different structure of a business that does not require 50,000 employees. It doesn't have the same level of overhead, and you don't spend the 10 years of some cost on a bunch of medicines so that you have to recoup such large amounts of blockbuster medicine. As an example, Centivax formally became independent and spun out the last day of last year. So we're December 31st, 2020. We are going clinical with our first therapeutic candidate in July of 2021. So we haven't spent 10 years to get this guy going. We've launched it within the same year of founding. We have a second drug coming in the next year. So because we spent so much less time in the discovery and optimization phase, then we spent less money. The team is smaller. We have way less overhead. And that translates into us being able to attack market opportunities where we could lower the price on purpose in order to be able to gain better access for everyone and grow a business more efficiently. It also opens up markets that other people have neglected, like anti-venom, anti-infectives, and a number of other areas where it's not that people can't pay for these medicines, they just can't pay outrageous prices. And some of these are actually pretty easy problems. They've been neglected. Nobody's worked on them. And so anti-venom, for instance, is a relatively easy one. It will never make $1 billion a year, but it could make $120 million a year, and you could help a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people a year who die or lose a limb, and we can make a medicine for them. And the technological path is relatively easy. We know that the venom is the problem. We know antibodies from sheep and horses work against them. We're just going to make a better product. And because of having a leaner business model, and ideally under with better manufacturing technologies, we can mass produce the stuff. So we don't need the new technologies for mass production to achieve this objective. But if those come online, then our model makes us pretty impossibly powerful, because then we can go mass produce medicines. We deliberately lower the price using the Henry Ford model, and we'd be able to mass produce and mass access biologics. We would create a revolution in a new class of very powerful, but currently somewhat cost prohibitive medicines.
All right, and actually that touches upon a topic that's quite dear to us at Kolabtree as well. So if you don't mind just digging a little deeper, giants like Pfizer, they obviously do have a critical role to play in many areas, including, funding, mass producing drugs and therapeutics that, driving large scale clinical trials. But I also firmly believe that a lot of innovation that happens on the ground among smaller biotech or other types of organizations, small staff, not with huge staff. These are probably organizations with less than 100 people. Would you agree with that sentiment? Do you think that a lot of the innovation is actually driven by smaller players? Or can you share some more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is yes, and here's why I think my perspectives have led me to that conclusion as well. I spent 4 years working at Pfizer. Pfizer just acquired Wyeth. It had 120,000 employees at one point. It was a juggernaut. I then spun out to create my own first and now second company. In distributed bio, my first company, I ended up running 78 antibody discovery and optimization programs for about 60 different pharmaceutical and small biotech companies. And then we also had extra licenses for our libraries and our software. So through that process, I ended up meeting hundreds of companies, many of which became my clients. And so they range from the major pharmas to the small biotechs. And that gave me an opportunity to watch the trends in the industry and also see how they were shifting. And so a couple things became obvious to me. One was that this isn't your daddy's pharma. Like, things have changed a lot. The big thing that's changed is that it used to be the case that everything had to happen within the hallowed halls of a major pharmaceutical company. So if you needed to use any of the technologies or expertises, that had to happen within, say, Pfizer or a Genentech or an Amgen. That from initial discovery, the hybridoma, you had a department for hybridoma, you had a department for manufacturing, a department for safety, you had a department running clinical, and then you had distribution partners. The modern pharma has fractaled that out into a constellation of contract research organizations, a whole bunch of different groups that enabled many of my previous clients and now my own company to run clinical trials. And we would partner with MilliporeSigma for manufacturing. We partner with Charles River Laboratories for safety and tox. We partner with a regulatory specialist and Premier to do our clinical study with the military. There are groups you can reach out to. And that means that the big pharmas have realized this. They've started downsizing, but it's challenging. It's hard to gain a lot of weight and then try to lose it. It's better not to get fat in the first place. So what I'm seeing now is a bunch of small biotechs who have been able to avoid growing in the first place. They keep themselves strategically lean. They have a key set of experts that are difficult to outsource because that's central to their core mission. But otherwise, anywhere that they can, they reach out to either consultants or to contract groups. And the power of it is that they do it on an as-needed basis because there's a change in the needs of that organization as it moves through a series of steps as it reaches clinical. So of course, you want to establish good relationships with contract research organizations or consultants, but you may want them for a period of like 4 months, and then you don't need them again. But if you'd like them, you call them up again 6 months from now. And it's that periodic access and the use of an existing expert outside without having to build everything internal, that allows my company to remain relatively lean. That keeps my costs down. And it really is faster, because if I have to go build every one of those expertises in-house, it's going to take me years to be able to do that. And those people aren't going to be working 60, 80% of the time. They'll just be working a lot for a short period. So it's not really that good of a fit with the actual model of my industry. What makes much more sense is to outsource those sets of expertises, except for the core things that we are uniquely good at, or it's just very challenging to outsource effectively. And so I'm always looking for organizations like what you're doing. I really like, because it is another way to be able to access people and expertise on an as-needed basis as you move through certain stages of these complex programs.
Thank you. Fantastic. Talking a little bit more about or digging deeper into how the sausage is made. I think with distributed bio. You developed the core business model, the research teams, and the technologies that kind of enabled distributed bio to become profitable without any investment. What would you advise other biotechnology founders to do to replicate this kind of success? And do you have you faced challenges with this kind of model where you do have to piece together expertise or services from kind of the market out there?
Sure. So I would say not every business is the same structure. So I got a little bit lucky and I had a good strategy. I will say I did write this down on a napkin back in 2011 with my previous two partners. It was a strategy for how to bootstrap a therapeutics company without investment. And the strategy was a little bit based on an opportunity of time, that I was planning that first we would build a software platform and then license it to a bunch of biotechs. And that software platform would use the cloud computing, where you can now rent computers. You don't need to go buy a bunch of computers to analyze populations of antibodies and T cells using deep sequencing instruments that were commoditized. So we didn't need to own them. The groups could own them, or they could send out the sequencing to a contract research organization. But what was missing in the industry was someone who could analyze them. And so what we created is a software platform, so people could go in and use that platform to analyze their data. And we licensed that out to a bunch of pharmaceutical companies and small biotechs. That funding from that first vertical empowered us to open up laboratories and build out, because we had seen more antibodies than anybody else, and we had resources now to build an even better mousetrap, which was a better antibody discovery library technology and an optimization technology, again, based on computational principles, but it was now a laboratory technology. And then we licensed that out and we started doing services on that. That had a greater cost of setup. So we needed the software money initially to get it going, but it also had much greater returns. So that was like, 10x better value in business. And then because we then had the software and the antibody discovery technologies, then we could begin sending internal programs through those and analyzing and optimizing towards challenging things that I thought could be really breakthrough medicines, but I thought would also be too risky to offer as a service. A service deal, you want them to work most of the time. So you need to be a little conservative. Internally, I'm willing to go throw 3 darts and only one of them hits. So I'm willing to go try hard things and have them fail. But if you have a dart that hits, it's a breakthrough medicine. That's a worthwhile exercise, and that makes sense to do internally. And so that was the trajectory we took. I would say to other founders, if you have a mechanism by which you can become profitable early, I would recommend to gear your business model towards that. And the reasons for that are not just reduced reliance on external funding sources and continuity. It also forces you to make things that work. And I cannot underemphasize how important that is. I think the standard model, we all know, results in lots of failures of biotechs. And there's a bunch of reasons for it. I think forcing those biotechs I think a lot of biotechs are pushed into maximization revenue business models, or they only have one asset, so they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And they're basically told to focus, which is, it's not what the VCs do. They don't focus on one asset. They have multiple assets. And these companies are told to focus on one thing. And I think this is bad portfolio management. You should always have a couple different things going on in your company that have a range of pretty sure thing, maybe not worth that much, towards risky but huge. And that ensures that the organism, which is your company, was able to thrive as it moves to the future. And having clients early is so powerful, because if you get a whole bunch of cash from your VCs and then you have no feedback for the next 4 years on whether that, like 4 years later, you find out whether anything works, there's not that constant pressure to make things that work. And the presence of clients means that everything I made had to be successful, because we were getting constant feedback. And if the stuff we made didn't work, they were going to complain and we wouldn't get new clients and the business would die. I learned this from my father running a restaurant. If the food wasn't good, you wouldn't get more people through the door. And that forces you to make excellent things. And I think I benefited from that, where now all of our technologies are ultra robust. They've been more validated than almost any other technologies out there. We know them intimately well because we built them. And that means we are uniquely positioned to apply them to go after challenging targets and be successful at them. So there are problems that you don't have a bunch of money laying around to go hire a bunch of people. Sometimes you obviously wish you could scale better and get a new instrument if you had more money coming in, where calculations like, well, if we want that, we need to get 3 more contracts in. And as I enter now this next phase with Centivax, it's a therapeutics company. So we've raised $14.5 million in non-dilutive funding from the Gates Foundation, the National Institute of Health, the Navy, the Army, Charles River Laboratories, and a number of other organizations. But we're about to go clinical. And then after that, we're about to, go through phase 2, phase 3, and rapid approval. And we have 13 other programs that are about to hit as well. So we are taking on some investors now, and we're contemplating going through an IPO, and that those will give us the mobilized resources that you just can't use the service model to be able to achieve. But that also takes us through a radical inflection point, and ultimately it's our objective, which is to make medicines that people want. But we got here, and we got here without the rounds of dilution, the risk that somebody who's given us money said, hey guys, I want you to actually focus on this one thing so I can get a rapid exit, which I understand why they think that way, but that's going to mean we're going to neglect the vision, which is a whole bunch of these great medicines that could do a lot of good. But we had to usher them through this path of being self-disciplined and self-produced, self-manifested destiny through profitability to be able to achieve that objective. And that means that we had to be all constantly strategic and lean on the business and make things that work the entire time.
I think that's great advice for any business, not just for biotech businesses. kind of going into the various areas that, let's say, a biotech organization has to deal with, running a research team, doing translational research, developing new technologies, plus obviously, and developing the business models, the supply chain, the manufacturing capabilities, or even if you're outsourcing, kind of identifying the correct suppliers, etc. So as you look at building an in-house team, and as you look at supplementing this team with the various services and capabilities, can you talk a little bit about the different parts of the ecosystem that you tap into, as and when you need some part of this process done, or when you need an expert to step in?
Sure. So I'll tell you about what we've done so far that we're pretty happy with. I'll tell you about areas that I'm still, I'm actively looking for. And I'm actually planning on looking at your website after this call. So in terms of our process, we used a number of organizations that enabled us as a small company to be able to go clinical. And this is something that I first sort of heard of back when I was introduced to a company called OMT back when I was at Pfizer. And I watched, it was two guys who had, the company consisted of a couple people, and they created a new organism, a transgenic rat that was able to produce human antibodies. And it was like mind blowing to me that two people could do this. And that was when I was first exposed to this concept of a virtual biotech, that if you have the knowledge to the center, at the beating heart of this thing, then you can contract out the various tasks. I then saw Atul Butte at Stanford speak to the concept of this virtual biotech. That's the extreme version where there's actually no wet lab. I don't fully do that because engineering is the unique advantage that we have. So I always do need a laboratory for what I do. But what it taught me is that the game has changed a lot. And then I saw that happening again with many of my clients who came to us to produce their antibodies. And I was realizing they're then going to another group for safety, another group for tox, another group for, and so forth for manufacturing, and then clinical. And so teams of, 15, 20 people, I saw them at the J Labs incubator, and then they would go IPO, or they would manifest these incredible value propositions and bring great medicines forward with small teams. And the way they were able to do that is the same thing we're doing now with Centivax. So we used Charles River Laboratory for our safety and tox. We used Atom to produce our cells. We used Millipore Sigma to manufacture and go through the CMC and GMP process. Premier is taking our medicine through our clinical research. We're partnering with them and with a co-PI from the Armed Forces. We use Berkshire to do our fill finish. We used a group called Applied Biomath to do our biostatistical analysis for our IND, and so forth. There's a constellation of these organizations that we now have relationships with, so we'll keep using them. That's our pipeline to bring medicines forward quickly using experts. We also have a panel of really great consultants that we reach out to for specific tasks where we want really good expertise in short periods, chunks. So some of those things have been solved, and we really do that through our network. I will say I have a list of things where I'm like, God, everyone's busy on my team, or we don't have this specific expertise. Would it not be great to reach out and go find someone to go do this? And for very senior functions, I tap my network for it. So we're looking at a very senior CMC consultant that we're going out to. But there's other expertises where it would be really nice to go have someone we could go tap on the shoulder and ask them questions for, or to carry out like certain bioinformatic analyses. I have a list of them right now, and I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to torture on my team to do it. And there aren't that many people who can do. That was my background, but I'm increasingly busy being a CEO, so I have less time to do the fun bioinformatics stuff, and so I have to go hand it off to someone else. I would love to go reach out to Kolabtree as an example and just put it up and be like, hi, here are these 4 research projects. Who can I go engage to go do that? And there are other tasks like accounting and other aspects of running a business where you'd like to be able to go reach out and have access to scientific experts or various other technical experts to bring in. I think the way we would do it is some types of tasks they're inherently finite. There's a lifetime to the project, in which case a short-term relationship makes sense. I think there's other things that we do where, as a growing company, if we find someone really great and we work with them multiple times, I think over time we just begin asking ourselves, hey, look, maybe we want to bring this person in full time. And so this gives an opportunity to try working with someone, which is just so much more valuable than an interview. I don't trust interviews. I don't really trust my own judgment of a person over 1 hour, whereas I absolutely trust my judgment of a person over 3 months or 6 months or a year. And so I think that's the way that we've been able to build and be successful. I think what you're doing, which is really great, is just a vastly increased market of access to these experts, because otherwise I'm limited by my network. And so that great person might be out there and I don't know about them if I don't have a way to contact them.
Yeah, thanks for that. On that note, that is one of the reasons we kind of do what we do. It is difficult to access this network, these skill sets, and so kind of touching upon that, you mentioned, you're looking for example, someone senior to help you out, someone with a senior background or skill set, and you're also looking for a second person to maybe do some of the not grunt work exactly, but still fairly technical, fairly advanced work. So right now, what are the various methods you use apart from kind of asking around in your network to source either an individual or an organization when you're looking to outsource a service?
Sure. So there's kind of four major ways that I do this. The first is the network. So I go, if I can think of someone, and I have a big network. Like I said, I because of me working with, frankly, most of the 7 of the top 10 pharma were my previous clients. I've talked to hundreds of biotech companies. I've worked with over 60 of them. Like, I know a bunch of people. So I ask people that I know. The problem is if there's someone who's really good and they're in that network, that person already may have tried to hire them, but you give it a shot. The second thing I do is I ask my team and say, hey, that's the extended network. Do you know anyone who's good? The third thing I do is I'm a scientific advisory panel board member for the University of San Francisco Biotechnology Program. And I've been taking on interns from that program back since 2014. And I was very instrumental. I've hired, I think, 12 people from that program. That's helped me build up distributed bio. We already have new team members from that same program now at Centivax. So I reach out and I just check. I think if it's a junior level function and with some training someone could do it, it's a growth opportunity for them. It's a way for me to test them out and I get results back. I apply nice to have programs, not need to have in that circumstance because you're taking on a pretty junior person. But the flip side is you can build someone amazing by identifying someone remarkable who did good work, and then they work great with my team. The last thing I've done is I have, because of the Netflix documentary series, and then I've just worked in this industry for years. I have a pretty large network on social media and like LinkedIn. And so, in one example, I sent out a tweet and I sent out a notice on LinkedIn some months ago. I said, hey, anybody want to work with me who's got a scientific background on solving a couple different problems I described? And 11 people signed up right away. So I manifested a team that I was able to work with to solve a couple of these problems, which were going to result in a publication. And it was very useful for us doing diligence around manufacturing, and there were some other scientific applications. So those are the methods that I use, but those methods have holes in them because I'm not actually doing a big exhaustive search. That's like, I'm a little bit biasing towards whoever read the tweet. And I'll let I have a decent following, but it's not like the world. It's a tiny little subslice. And so what I worry about is my blind spots. I worry about there's that great person out there who hasn't heard the message and I don't know how to reach out to them. And I think that's the power of being able to look through a larger network of individuals like you're building.
Okay, awesome. And I think coming to kind of the current situation, the situation we're in right now, maybe the first question would be, how has the pandemic and kind of the evolving face of biotechnology affected how you're growing your newest company?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's affected us in a very direct way because we're making a medicine for the pandemic, but it's also had some indirect and I think sometimes beneficial effects on the way the company's grown. So as a consequence of the spin out, we were planning new laboratory sites, and we had new policies that I'd applied at Distributed Bio and applying in my new organization that people who don't need to go into the office should work remote. Also, in the process of creating the new business, some of our key personnel at Centivax live in different places around the country, because if you don't need to show up at the site, what's the difference between not showing up and being a mile away from not showing up and being 1,000 miles away? Nothing. As long as you have a team which is commonly motivated and organized. I think if you have a group where people feel unmotivated or uninterested, this doesn't work. And I think that's why you need the rah of everyone showing up. I don't think you actually need that for a group of passionate people who believe in a cause. I think then the physical locality doesn't matter. And then our team, for instance, we have people in South San Francisco and San Francisco, but we also have people in San Diego. We have people in Chicago. We have people in Boston. We have people in Egypt. Like, we have people all around the world who work with us. And in the internship group, there's people in the UK. There's people in a whole bunch of multiple nations. I think France, Canada, and it doesn't matter, because what we end up doing is we collectively meet up. We have shared tools for sharing data. We meet up through Zooms. And we're able to get the work done. Now, I think there is a power in meeting up in person. That's part of the reason I just traveled to Hawaii, was that I'm planning to get a property so that Centivax has a research retreat. And that gives us an opportunity for the diaspora of the organization, which is truly global and everyone's distant. But I think it is a good idea to have team members all gather in a certain location, to have like surfboards and chalkboards, so we can kind of come up and theorize and work together in person. I think that's good for an organization. It can accelerate creativity. And I figured if you're going to do that, you might as well do it somewhere awesome. So that was the strategy there. And that's how I'm intending to grow the business. It's going to be strategic. It's the right set of minds. And there's this sort of halo of intellectual support that could span the globe. We have a hardcore laboratory, and I need to be local to it because I want to be able to go into it sometimes. But that flexibility has really helped me pick not just the people who are local and handy, but really the right people with the right passion and intellectual drive and background training and ability to execute. And I can grab them from anywhere, which is really exciting. And I think that actually, first off, everyone likes it better because you can say you don't have to do traffic. Traffic is terrible. Everyone hates traffic. You can work from home. You can go get your coffee. You can do the projects. You can spend a little more time doing stuff, less time wasting time in traffic, more time home with your kids and your family. I think it's better work-life balance. And if anything, I actually think we might be a little bit more productive than in a common location where, I think there's a benefit from me walking around and talking to each person in the lab, and I can check in on people. There's some value to it. But I think also when you have a bunch of people in a common space, I don't know, sometimes they goof off more. And so I think here you really do think, okay, I'm going to go into my office, I'm going to get the work done, I'm going to contact the people I need to, and then I'm going to sign off and go do other things. And I hope that continues to be the more eco-friendly, the more efficient, and that better new world order of how to make a business like mine, and hopefully many others, that can make new breakthrough products to sell them for less, benefit more people, and people enjoy working there for longer periods of time.
Fantastic. So do you foresee, once the pandemic ends and we're able to be around each other again a lot more safely, do you kind of foresee this trend growing even once people go back to the office, or are able to go back to the office?
Yeah, I think, at least I can speak to what happened in San Francisco. So San Francisco has ridiculous pricing. Basically, this is an artificial, absurd housing. And it's really, like, I'll be honest, like, there's a lot of things I like about San Francisco, but it's not like, I don't know, I think Austin has more fun things going on. I think honestly the prices got so expensive that a lot of the artists and the cool people that do fun things that benefit and enrich the rest of our lives, they had to leave. And I think because of this crisis, there was a lot of people who were like, everything's shut down, the things that are left to do aren't available. Like, why should I pay if I can now work remote? Because all the high tech companies that are hiring these people say don't come into the office. They're like, why should I pay San Francisco prices but to not receive San Francisco benefits? And so there was an exodus. You could see U-Hauls all over the city for months, where people like moved out to the country and they continue to do their high-tech jobs. And I think it's just going to be really difficult for these companies to change a policy and say, okay, you guys need to come back in now. They're not going to do that. So those people there's now a permanent diaspora and a changing culture of needing to physically be in the office, which is crazy that they required that for high-tech companies anyway, because those people, like, by definition, most of them are going in front of a computer all day and then stopping. So they could work on the moon. It shouldn't matter. And I think that trend in lots of other organizations, people moved, right? People changed where they lived. I think this is actually alleviating and solving some of the problem of forced physical relocation to city centers, which could be good for traffic. It could be good for lifestyle. It could help reduce pricing on housing. So I do hope this continues. I hope that there's certain types of tasks we need to be in person, and for sure we make space for them by a lot of the types of business that doesn't require a physical location. Those people should be encouraged to live somewhere distant. This actually insulates the world from the next pandemic, but it also just creates a better distribution of people out in different communities. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that, and I hope it continues. I certainly hope to continue leveraging that and Centivax.
All right. Final couple of questions. So, with the Netflix documentary, obviously it was so timely. And I think all the participants in the documentary, for everyone, it was a question of when, not if. But were you surprised with how quickly things unfolded in this last couple of years?
Yeah. So it was nuts, but I'll caveat that at the end. So yeah, we spent half of 2019 getting filmed, and I didn't realize how much I'd signed up for. I thought it was a good idea. My feeling was that there's been kind of a broken trust between the pharmaceutical industry and people, and that broken trust has given rise to conspiracy theories and vaccine hesitancy. And so I thought, we're a small company. It's not like I'm going to change the whole world with this, but I thought in my small way, if I could open the doors so people could see how we actually are doing these things, that we are good people trying hard, and these things are challenging, and we could see kind of our triumphs, but also our troubles and failures and frustrations, that people would really, maybe that would create a new dialogue and a little bit more trust and understanding, and at least create a policy of transparency in our organization, that we're going to take people along the ride for us. So we tried that, but at the same time, when it was getting ready to come out in January, people were like, "Oh, are they going to portray us well? Is this going to be goofy, or is it, are they going to make us look like villains?" And I was like, you know what, guys, in the end, it doesn't matter, because there's 10,000 things on Netflix and no one's going to watch this. Instead, the day it came out, within a day, 57 million people were quarantined in China. And so we ended up on the front page of Netflix globally for like 6 weeks. So that was definitely nuts. The timing was crazy. This whole experience has been crazy, and it's what I've been fighting to try to avoid. And it's been kind of remarkable that I now talk to people who now are having, like, before they barely understand what a vaccine is. Now people are like, "Well, what do you think about the effector functions of an antibody?" And so it's kind of cool that, like, the world's more aware of my work. But also, if I step back, it wasn't that crazy. So people have surprisingly short-term memories for troubles past. And if you think about it, so this one was a particularly bad outbreak, right? But what have we had recently? There's always been some new outbreak. And so people always would have said it seems coincidental that it came out around this, because we had HIV, we had MERS, we had the previous SARS outbreak. There was this African swine fever thing happening in pigs. There's been influenza pandemics, 5 in the past century. Like I said, HIV, there's been the tuberculosis expansion globally. We've had problems with smallpox, we've had polio. You name it, the humanity has been constantly plagued since the beginning of time by massive epidemic and pandemic outbreaks. And so if it wasn't this one, it would be something else. And I'll tell you, once this thing resolves, there's going to be another one, until we put our foot down and we demand to create broad spectrum vaccines and broad spectrum therapeutics to be able to win the forever war against some of our most ancient enemies. And I think that is why I'm an optimist, is that unlike every generation before us that has passed the torch of knowledge on how to fight these pathogens, back to like the most ancient texts and excavation sites, to now, we are better armed than we have ever been armed before to begin winning some of these battles forever. So I think it is possible for us to fight through this pandemic and begin to create the kinds of medicines where we exterminate, we eradicate some of these pathogens, and we can create a future for our children that is a post-pathogen future, where they look back on these things and they seem as outdated as the plague, and they can live and the beauty of doing that is that every generation after that will live healthier lives, because we can eliminate some of these things that have been bothering us, and we do have those powers within our generation. That's why I do what I do, and I think that's a good reason for us not to be depressed in the middle of this pandemic. I know this one seems tough, but when this trouble came to us this time, we were better armed than we ever were before, and it's given great attention right in the middle of the golden age of biotechnology. And so I am hoping that I, as well as other groups, will stay focused on continuing to engage eradication policies against these pathogens, so that we can just live better lives for every generation that comes after in humanity.
Absolutely. So one final question, as someone who's worked in academia as well as on the business side of things, do you have any advice for Kolabtree and how we can help organizations or support organizations like Centivax and the thousands of others out there?
Interesting. Yeah, so I think having academic access would be great, because that's often what these sorts of organizations need. I think what I've watched with small startup biotechs and medium-sized biotechs is that when you watch them falter, which I'm like perversely always fascinated by, like, why did they fail? That's such an interesting question, because the more you learn about that, hopefully you can guide it towards a better success. Often it comes down to either a lack of an expertise in the room or a lack of empowerment of that person to be able to provide feedback. So it's the same reason, many things fail. So access to experts, or some group to be able to evaluate a problem and give an assessment. I think there's two aspects to that. One is that being able to access to someone to come in. I think there's a more subtle problem here, and I don't know how to solve it exactly, but sometimes these groups don't know what they don't know. And so having some sort of like review forum where they could go in and say, hey, look, here's where we are. What do you think? And some meta group they consult with, go, you know what, here's, I think, your problems. And then you could actually have one group of people come in and giving them counseling guidance or like steering guidance. And then they could recommend additional people in the network to go fill in holes. I think that is a two-stage process that I would consider really important, because that's what I watched at the incubator I was at, and in many of these companies I've gone in and I've done that a little bit. I said, hey guys, look, I'm a little worried because I'm noticing you're not doing this thing that I know a number of other companies are doing. And it seems like there's a hole in what you're doing right now. The really expensive guys get consultants to do this, but there's a hole for these small biotechs. So if the VCs don't know enough, and that's the power of VCs, is they've seen a bunch of companies. So if they're informed VCs, they can protect their investments. But if they're not that familiar with the space, then I think the company can kind of run blind in the wrong direction. And they won't know who else to reach out in Kolabtree. So that's the power of it, is they'd almost like get a temporary scientific advisory or technical advisory committee, which they would resource through Kolabtree, and then that group could suggest additional groups of people that they should reach out to. So that would be one thing to consider. It's the maitre d' of Kolabtree. And then the second thing would be from the perspective of the other side of the academic side, or the groups. I think they're a little bit more empowered because they know what they can do. And so they could actually reach actively out, but they need to be able to see what's on the other side. They need to see the group of people that are out searching and know a little bit about them, because then that solves the problem as well, by them tapping them on the shoulder and be like, hey, you might want to consider what I have to do. I mean, I know, like on LinkedIn, this happens to me all the time. It's a bit annoying because I get a bunch of stuff that's not relevant for me, but it's I've had a couple of times where people have reached out, and it's actually, if they've done their research right, it's exactly what I'm interested in. And then I start a conversation with them. So I think that could be helpful as well. So I think the challenge with academics is I've worked with a mix of, and I don't want to overgeneralize. I find that this is an irritating stereotype, but it is the case that the reward structures for academia are quite different than in industry. So sometimes academic groups, when you engage with them, the big question industry people ask them is like, what's your example of being able to finish a project? Because there's sometimes really smart people like to agonize over things they don't like to finish. So I think just having a precedent of a set of transactions they completed previously for other engagements, that gives a lot of confidence that person's good to work with. And so I think something like that with a review process or some mechanism where they can go talk with people who've worked with them before, or, okay, if I engage this person, they're going to be professional, they're going to get this thing done in a timely fashion, it's going to be excellent work product. That sort of review process would be valuable.
Thanks a ton. That's, I think, really valuable advice for us. And, we have seen experts and consultants, in fact, kind of, to their credit, tell organizations if something they're proposing is not feasible or not the correct way to go. They will outright and say, no, this is not the correct approach. You need to rethink, rather than just kind of taking on the project and things like that. So very valuable advice. So Jake, thank you. This has been a fabulous chat. I think, and so thank you for your time. Thank you for having this chat with me. And I'm just going to end the recording on that. Are there any last words or parting words you want to say before I stop the recording?
Sure. I just want to say thanks for having me on and for the work you do at Kolabtree.